Hi, I'm Lexi and this is Hannah, and we're Wild About Conservation.
This is the podcast where we explore the world of conservation through discussions with our very knowledgeable guests. And this season's focus is on all things ocean.
In this inspiring episode, we're joined by a friend of ours, Harry Wright, who is a lawyer, a social entrepreneur expert, and a passionate conservationist. Harry is the CEO of the Conservation Project International, which is an international NGO which empowers young people to reach their potential and become future leaders in conservation.
We chat about how his training as a lawyer gave him an invaluable set of skills to be the conservationist he is today, the different projects under the TCP remit, and how they are supporting the training of the next generation of conservationists. Hi, thank you for chatting to us today. So can you firstly introduce yourself to our listeners, who you are, what you do, your pronouns, and your key interest in conservation?
Well, thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be joining with you both. So my name is Harry Wright. I am the CEO of the Conservation Project International. My pronouns are he and him, and my interest in conservation is helping to support and mentor the next generation of young conservationists and think of new collaborative ways of solving urgent conservation issues.
That all sounds amazing. I am so excited for this episode and to get to talk about your work a little bit more. So before we take a deep dive into your experiences, Harry, we do have a short game we like to play with our guests. So it's supposed to be this really fun quick fire round of a couple of questions to keep you on your toes, to warm you up, and so we get to know you a little bit better. So firstly, if you could live in any habitat, what would it be?
Coral reef system.
Nice. What is something that you love that has absolutely nothing to do with conservation?
Marmite toast.
Interesting. And if you could fly, breathe underwater, or hibernate, what would it be?
I think I would fly.
Nice.
I wasn't expecting the answer of Marmite toast at all.
I had it for breakfast this morning.
I like that. Fly and eat Marmite toast. It sounds good while on a coral reef. So finally, every episode, Harry, we ask our guests how they get wild about conservation. So how do you get wild?
Good question. I love just being in nature, really, and I think the excitement of looking for a species and the adventure of going to somewhere amazing, whether it's a rainforest or a coral reef, and just taking it all in, I think, is what I really enjoy with the natural world.
I like that kind of thought there of taking it all in. I said to someone the other day, it's that moment you step off in a beautiful place and you just stop for a second is such a nice feeling.
Absolutely, and I think definitely as well, being locked down for so long, can't wait to go back and enjoy nature.
Yeah, I think
totally
everybody's
agree.
been very well acquainted with their local nature, which is wonderful in itself. But I can't wait to get a little bit further away from my own house.
Yes, same, definitely.
Right, Harry. So now on to the main topic, you and your life. I met you when we were doing an internship kind of as a crossover a few years ago. So I know a little bit about you, but would you care to tell our listeners kind of your education and your history and then kind of what really got you into conservation?
Yeah, sure. No. So basically, by profession, I'm a lawyer by profession. I qualified as a solicitor back in 2016, which is now seems a very long time ago. And I originally started off working in corporate law and worked on some renewable energy transactions, which was quite interesting, but mainly sort of in the healthcare and in the sports sector. And I soon realised that working till 2 or 3 in the morning wasn't really quite what I was after. So I've always had this burning passion for conservation and the environment. And when I was actually training as a lawyer, I used to have a blog where I used to speak about certain conservation issues. Mainly back in that was back in 2015. It was more around sort of Sumatra and what's happening with the orangutan. and indigenous communities and things like that. So when I qualified as a lawyer, I realised that my real passion is in conservation, and it was then when I decided to start up the conservation projects back in 2017, just before I came to see Lexi in the Maldives. And from there, really, it's sort of taken off. Over the last couple of years, we've done a huge amount of work working with young conservationists from around the world and working on different research projects. And it's been very exciting and it's been so fulfilling. I'm so glad that I made that decision back then to actually set up my own organization and to try and do as much as I can to support the next sort of future of change makers. So that's really the journey. We've now helped, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years, nearly 500 young people from around the world. We've worked on 10 different research projects from around the world. We've done numerous events with Plymouth, Bristol UWE, Oxford University. We've got a thriving community of around 50 young people, which we speak with nearly every day. And it's just been remarkable. It's been the best thing I've ever done in my life, and I'm very excited about the future of the organisation. And I think now is a really good time to be, working virtually and connecting with young people is becoming more and more easier, and more people are really interested in the space. So yeah, very very excited about what the future of the organisation and where we're going to go.
It's really cool hearing how the Conservation Project International became. One of the things two things I've picked up on there. Obviously, you're talking about young conservationists. Is there a certain age band that you work with?
Yeah, so mainly the people we work with are from 18 to sort of 35. I'd say that's branched. But we have done events with schools as well. But we've mostly focused on undergraduate, postgraduate, and sort of PhD and professionals as kind of our target audience, I would say.
And then in terms of the virtual working, obviously working with all these different groups of people, and for me, doing a PhD myself, something I've really noticed with virtual working is how everything suddenly becomes so much more accessible, even for me as a student, because I used to be on fieldwork all the time and not be able to actually join a lot of these training sessions. Do you think that you are using the virtual world much more now and are going to keep using that even say a year, 2 years, 2024 from now?
Yeah, definitely. No, I think it's a really really good question. And we've actually found the transition more accessible, as you mentioned. And I think doing things online is actually a lot easier for people like yourself. You're working on a PhD, but maybe you want to join an event at 7 o'clock in the evening. All you have to do is sort of log on to Zoom. You can join a webinar. And I think having the virtual landscape really opens up the international audience as well. We just did a recent event, a hackathon in December, where we had 130 young people join from 16 different countries around the world. So that for me, the virtual landscape is a really great connection point to talk and discuss and meet new people and collaborate on different projects. The downside to that is that having things in person is obviously a lot more personal. You can really connect with people, I think, a lot more when you're in person. And then the downside is that you can't get to travel and see all these amazing projects for the minute. So that's been really depressing. But I think virtually is definitely the future, and for us, it's definitely a platform which we're going to be using a lot more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you there. I think there's definitely a sweet spot of virtual use as well as that human interaction, because you can't get rid of it. I think that's one thing that the pandemic has taught us, is that we crave that human interaction for many many more things than we ever gave it credit for. So I think it makes sense that in the future you'll be looking at using both. I know the whole point is talking about you as this the head of this NGO, but I did want to ask, Harry, are you still a lawyer?
So yes, I'm still a qualified lawyer, and I've just finished working at a very big law firm. So I finished just before Christmas working there. I was working there for 2 years full time, and I'm now working for a social impact organisation which focuses in on supporting entrepreneurs so what they term as, and you may have come across this term, as social enterprise.
Hmm.
So so that's really my work at the moment. Is I work in the investment team at a leading organisation, and we help invest in really cool entrepreneurs, and more of a sort of business consultancy kind of role rather than legal. But and then at the same time, obviously still doing all of the NGO work at the same time as well.
That sounds amazing. You've got such a wholesome career. But can I ask, other than passion, how do you manage to balance your job, the charity, and a life outside of that? Have you got any like secret hints and tips?
Aha, it's a very good. It's like I do question this myself actually, Lexi, quite often. What am I doing? I guess it is, I think the passion um, definitely helps. So when I work on conservation work, I don't see it as a job. I
Hmm.
see it as an interest, a hobby, and a kind of like we have like a community, like a family feeling with the organisation. A lot of these people which have joined us, some of them are my really good friends now. So it's fun. I really enjoy it, and it never seems like a hassle, or it never seems like a full-time job. When we're working on projects, obviously when I'm working full-time, especially when I was as a lawyer, and having to organise things in the evening, and sometimes you have to work weekends, you've got to get up early, you're working till maybe 12, 1 o'clock at night time. But I do it because I'm in a position to do it, if that makes any sense. I do it because I can, and I feel I have a moral obligation to also do it. Um, so I feel a sense of duty in a way. I don't know if that really makes any sense, but it's because I care so much about the issue. It drives me to work even harder each year to try and solve some of these critical issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think from what I know of the project, the way that you're doing it by empowering these young environmentalists and conservationists is really powerful because it's that whole thing. If you train one person, that's excellent, but if you train multiple people, that you're building a network that can go on and it's much more impactful. And it is that whole thing of, sure, everybody can think about doing like a cleanup as they're going for a walk around their local park. That's excellent. It has such a larger impact than you think it does, just taking one bit of litter out of your environment. So I think get you being a part of giving this education and these skills to so many people is really powerful.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think you touched on a really good point there around networks. And for me, in my own professional career, having a strong network around me and using things like LinkedIn, and having calls and catch ups with people and building that professional network has definitely helped me in my own professional career. And I think that sort of community of experts cross sector, not only just conservationists, but people from the private sector, people from the engineering sector, the construction industry, all of these areas which touch on environmental issues and can offer careers in the environmental sector. That is something which we're very strong on, helping students create their own networks, teaching them about business development, encouraging them to use LinkedIn to set up introductory calls to meet people, because it could only take, setting up a coffee or a virtual coffee with one person in HR, or, it's a high up in an organization, for you to get your foot in the door, and to, when you apply for that position, knowing the person already in that organization really helps. And these networks that we're creating are of such interest, I think, to young people, and such can really help you pursue, better things in your career. So yeah, no, definitely, I agree. I think networking is a really essential part of this.
I think you've picked up and kind of talked about two really important things there of the passion and sharing passion with other people and how that can evoke change. But also, like you've been saying, the networking, this is something that's come up a few times in a couple of our recordings, is that conservation isn't just one thing. Conservation comes in so many forms, and thinking I want to work in conservation does address potentially those networks and the different people that you meet, and who knows where you're going to end up, from lawyer to running a conservation project. And talking of those networks, kind of other than yourself, what does the team that helps you run the Conservation Project International look like?
Yeah, well, so our team is incredible. We've got some amazing people that I work with, and these are people. So basically, the core team are people which I worked with very when I first set the project up back in 2017. There's a one girl. I hope I'm going to name drop her, but she's called Abby Croker, and she came with us to Bonn in Germany at the just before the climate conference, and we presented at the Youth of Climate conference, so the prior to the actual COP. But Abby, back then, I think she was a undergraduate student. She has been working with us on the community side. She's very good on the fundraising side, and she's now gone on to do a PhD, actually, I think at Imperial College in climate change. So she's been with us from the very start and has a huge amount of energy, and she's a real pleasure to work with. And then we've got a really cool team, I would say, of sort of 10 people I work with on a daily and weekly basis. And these are people I've met along the way, people who I trust, and bring different skills to the organization. So we've got two amazing people which joined recently, Emma and Michael. Emma does all of our social media marketing. Michael's very good on our finances, and when you're coming to put together quite boring things like pitch documents and financial modeling, he's the man to go to for that. And yeah, so we've got Emily who works on partnerships. We've got scientists. So Rosanna is an amazing scientist in Italy, and she's works with us on our wildlife crime work. We have an acoustic scientist called Davide, and this guy is like seriously cool. He's like the coolest guy I've met in conservation. So his job is to study the acoustic sounds of cetaceans. I mean, imagine that. So what do you do for a living? I work with whales and dolphins and listen to what they say. I mean, it's a pretty cool position. And then my two directors I work with are David and Jessica, who are both global experts in international crime, from the US, former US State Department individuals. And yeah, they provide a huge amount of strategic oversight and help us link to government bodies and thinking of things from a sort of higher angle. So there's an enormous amount of people that we work with really closely, and each individual brings a unique set of skills to the organisation, and really, all of these people work on a voluntary basis, so they put a huge amount of time and effort into helping us with our mission, and it's really heartwarming to see that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Even hearing you speak about it and about these friends,
Yeah.
really, that you get to work alongside is so humbling. And like, I could just listen to you talk all day. But I did have a question. So we've mentioned a couple of times this kind of network building and knowledge building. But would you be able to just give us a brief overview of what the Conservation Project International actually does to help young conservationists?
Yeah, of course. So one of the things we do is we help firstly students through like mentoring and as I mentioned, networking, and we actually link young people to conservation research projects around the world. So we set up a marine biologist called Dr. Andrea Guyon a blue shark project in Cornwall. And over the years, we've been sending young people to go with Andrea on the boat to study the sharks and to get some really great field research experience. We've also have projects. We worked on a project in Kenya with Nazio Trust and Oxford University, and we sent a number of researchers over there. And we also work on a cetacean project in Ischia, which is just off the Gulf of Naples, so very close to Naples. And that's an amazing project which studies 5 species of cetacean. And we sent, I think, around 20 to 40 young people there. So we basically link and provide really great opportunities to get some field research experience, to learn more about certain species and to work really closely with researchers. We also run collaborative events. So an example of that is that we run day workshops and day hackathons or afternoon hackathons with universities. So we've recently done one with Plymouth University just last month, which was on the marine illegal wildlife trade. And we've got this great relationship with Plymouth Marine Institute, where we do a number of like really cool events with them, where it's like an NGO challenge, linking their students to some of our projects, and doing these like hackathon type events. We've also got a number of projects which we did start to do just before COVID hit us, which sadly we've just because of the difficulty in traveling really at the moment, we put those on the back burner. And then the most recent work we've done has been around the vaquita, and there's a huge amount of work to do on that topic as well. So yeah, we do an awful lot, and sometimes more than we can really manage. But there's just so much work to do, Lexi. It's crazy.
Yeah, it definitely sounds that way. But you mentioned so many projects and so many like different, even spheres of the world that you've worked in and with, and these people that you've worked with on their specialties. How do you decide which projects to do? Do you get contacted, or is it about using this network of people that you've met and people that you know to create these projects for your charity to work on and help?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think so. Basically, I would normally go and visit the project that we support. So I want to make sure that it's the type of projects which I really love working with are researchers who are doing really important and impactful work, but don't necessarily have the support that the big NGOs have when it comes to funding, and just
Hmm.
require some extra help. Whether it's either through promoting or doing joint articles, or actually sending our volunteers to go work with them to help them with their work. And there's a lot of these researchers I come across, these research projects, and I will normally meet and get to know the teams, and if I like them, we then work out what do they need, how can we collaborate, how can we provide them with a service, and that's normally the basis of how we start a partnership together. And I really try and search out these amazing people who are, dedicating their lives to conservation, but really just not getting enough support. And without vital support, the whole project will collapse. And you've probably come across many projects like this yourself, and so they're the kind of ones we look at. And we also do a lot of work around unique species as well. Um,
Hmm.
so some of the species I'm going to be working with soon are mainly cetacean focused. So the vaquita. Um, had a great conversation recently around the Amazonian river dolphin, which is an extraordinary species, and
Yeah.
humpback whales, orcas, and sperm whales as well. So a lot of it is cetacean and marine focused as well.
And just picking up on that, kind of, I'm just in awe of all these projects. um, all of these different projects, obviously, you've spoken about the marine illegal wildlife trade, the vaquita, the isha, the blue shark project, all of these others that are going on, things to do with humpbacks. So I want to kind of get a bit more focus on those different projects. So trying to pick which one to start with. I think Isha, and I hope I'm pronouncing that relatively correctly, is obviously in Italy, as you said, and I think people don't actually realize how many whales and dolphins and different species and what you might be able to see in that kind of area. So can you give us a bit of an overview of the project, the different cetaceans you're working with, what kind of research is going on?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So it's Ischia is the island.
Ischia.
Yeah. Even though your one sounded very interesting as well. Yeah, so Ischia is so Naples. So basically, to get to Ischia, you got to fly into Naples, which my fiance's from Naples, so I know the place really well. Which is a crazy town. I don't know if you've ever been. It's manic.
I
There's
got very lost there
yeah.
several years ago,
Did you
trying to
really?
get to a train station to get to Pompeii, and everyone just kept saying Garibaldi, and we were like, "Who is Garibaldi?" And Garibaldi was someone that dug. I think it's to do with freedom. We thought they were imitating someone riding a horse. They weren't. They were imitating someone digging. Um, so yeah, been very lost there.
Yeah, it's a crazy place, isn't it? It's but that's why I love it. The place is rich in history, as you mentioned. Pompeii's like, I think half an hour on a train.
Mm.
So to get to Ischia, you have to get a ferry from the port of Naples, and it takes about an hour on the ferry, and then you land on Ischia, which is a volcanic island. So and it's just a very beautiful place. There is rich in enclaves, and the underground is all with the minerals. It's very rich volcanic region, and the research project there is called the Ischia Dolphin Project, and is run by it's basically when I first visited it, I came to Ischia. I think it's the second time I've ever been there, and I had to get so there's not much transport on the island, so you have to walk a lot. It's obviously very hilly because it's a volcanic island, and I was trying to find this port where there was a boat which they run the project from, and I got to the boat, and there's the skipper or the captain, this guy called Angelo, and this guy is like something from the National Geographic films back in 1950s. We had homemade wine, which he makes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Amazing.
and he's got a boat which he built. I mean, it's this wooden ship, like from I don't know, from the pirate days, which he's built. He lives on it as well, and he's got a really cute
Wow.
dog, which is also there. Um, so Angelo takes groups of students and researchers out on the boat into past the marine protected area which they have there. And you be on the boat for I reckon 2 or 3 hours, and he knows all of the cetaceans very well there. So they've got 5 species of cetaceans, including the sperm whale and the fin whale, and then 3 species of dolphin. They sadly had 7 species of cetaceans in 1990, but just because of the pollution, overfishing, and tourism, 2 species have disappeared from the area. But the sperm whale there, so they basically are a research organisation. So they collect, they use hydrophones, and they have like a treasure trove of acoustic data and scientific research. They identify using a number of scientific techniques the whales and the dolphins that live there, and they have a database, and they do educational programs with the local people in Ischia, and also online. So they've done a lot of work there. The Yeah, so they've lost 2 species in the last 30 years. But the really interesting thing about this project is that they have a subspecies of the sperm whale which lives in and around Ischia. And what they found is that through their research is that this sperm whale has its own local language. So it's sort of cut off from the rest of the Mediterranean, and it has its own local language, which I find fascinating. These are like local species which have their own communication, and yeah, so they've done a lot of work on that. And do you know what? The only downside to this project is every time I go there, I never see a thing. I think I'm like a bad omen to the project because I've never actually seen any of the cetaceans living there. But the volunteers will come back and they're like, yeah, we saw, a group of Rizzo dolphins, and we got to see the sperm whales and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, well, that's not fair. I never get to see anything. Um,
Have to live vicariously through the volunteers.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, which is really unfair because I've done so much work with this amazing place. But yeah, so it's just an amazing place, and the species there are fascinating. We were at one point going to do an underwater VR film, working with a freediver.
Hmm.
So that they were gonna have a famous freediver who would come and swim underneath the water, obviously from a safe distance away from the sperm whales, but then film this kind of like underwater VR film with sperm whales. That was a project which we were going to run, which we might look at in the future. But yeah, no, it's just an amazing place, and I never knew about the project when I did some work in Naples as a lawyer, and never knew about it. Not many people in Naples do know about it. So that's the beauty of the project, really, is that it's doing all this amazing work again, kind of unnoticed. So that's the reason why we support it.
Yeah, that sounds amazing that you're able to like find these diamonds of these conservation projects that are literal local people on their own in their own area doing what they can with what they have. God, you're hitting me in the feels today, Harry. No, but we did have a recording earlier on in the season with another friend of ours, Kate, who spoke a lot about cetaceans. And I think we've decided it's one of those species that, I mean, to be fair, we could have just an entire podcast season on, let's be honest, just the orca or just the bottlenose dolphin. They're that interesting, but I can't believe they've got their own local like dialect. I mean, I can because they're very smart, but you know when something just blows your mind a little bit? I think I've got a favourite fact from every single episode so far. Could you, by any chance, do the exact same thing and give us a wonderful overview on the Blue Shark project, which I think you said was a little bit closer to home?
Yeah, no, of course I can. Yeah, yeah. So this is so Andrea is our marine biologist who set this project up, and I first came across this one when I did a presentation on the conservation project at South Devon College in 2017, I think it was. And I was talking about how we can use crowdfunding to help support and help fund research projects, and how this is a really unique way back then. Well, it was. It's obviously not anymore. A unique way to raise funds for research projects. And Andrea sort of grabbed me after the presentation and told me that he has this amazing shark project which he wants to raise some funding for, and which involves a multi-annual research project which will study the impact of bioaccumulations and pollutants on the health of the sharks around the southwest coast of England. And it involved him going out on a boat to take genetic samples, small genetic samples from the blue sharks, and then studying those in a chemical laboratory to see how things like microplastics and pollutants are affecting the health of the sharks. I said, that sounds amazing. Why don't we see if we can do a crowdfunding campaign to raise some money for you to make sure that you have the funding in place to do the research, and then to do the next stage, which would be the sampling and the genetic sampling as well. So the first thing we did together is that we launched a crowdfunding campaign, and which was really fun. We created like Blue Shark t-shirts. We had a whole bunch of the team who worked on social media for us, and we put together this really cool campaign, and we raised, I think, £1,500, which doesn't seem like a lot, but actually it gave the project the legs to start, which was amazing. And Andrea has then subsequently gone on to get some more funding from different places for the project. So that was how it started. Again, you're not going to believe this. I haven't seen any of the blue sharks. So every time,
Sensing a theme
yeah,
here.
it's not fair, is it? So every time I go down, Andrea's like, why don't you come down, in September? We're going to go out. It's going to be amazing. And I'm like, yeah, definitely. So I booked some time off work, and every time I go down, a storm hits, right? So the boat can't even go out. So that's happened to me 3 times on this
I
trip.
feel like you
So
deserve some good karma for all the work that
yeah,
you do and how busy it sounds like you are. You deserve some good karma with any of this animal spotting.
I totally agree with you, actually, Lexi, 100%. It's about time I get to see something cool.
I know, I feel like you're going to have a card up your sleeve where you're like, but then I saw this, but I also feel like that card
It's
isn't
not. I'm going
coming.
to tell you, it's not coming at all, unfortunately. I wish it was. So yeah, I've never been out there, but so a lot of our volunteers have, and you can actually go snorkeling with the sharks as well, which is amazing. So we've got loads of footage of people who have done the research. We've got films. There's a whole website on the Blue Shark Project, and we've gathered a lot of really good feedback. So the students love it, and this project is also really quite personal to me as well, because we did have one of our volunteers who went with Andrea on the project, and 2 years ago she sadly died. And her family were just so lovely that they donated some funding to the project in remembrance of her.
Wow.
So yeah, that was really sad. So that's there's a real personal connection to the project as well. And every time I think we send a young person out on the project, it gives them a life-changing experience, and they can then use that when they go to apply for other jobs, to find a job in the sector as well. So it's great. Andrea is just this amazing guy. He really is. He's just we had the Vaquita project recently, and he attended our hackathon, and he put together an eDNA protocol, which they might be able to use in the Sea of Cortez, just in a couple of hours. He's one of the most intelligent scientists I've ever worked with, and works on so many different issues. And he's really passionate about sharks. We call him the Shark Man, and he's just a joy to work with, really. But the great thing about the Blue Shark project is that once we really trying to hone in on this genetic sampling so we can get the best sample possible. And we're now going out. I think Andrea is going out again this year, and he'll go out with fishermen this time. The great thing about the project originally was that it did not hurt the sharks at all. We didn't have to get on board the sharks. It was a very small sample we got from it, so they hardly even noticed. But the cost of going out on the boats were like £700 a trip, so that eats away at your funding very quickly. And we now have to try and think of new ways, cheap, resourceful ways, which we can continue doing the project. But the good thing is about this one is that it's a multi-annual project. It has real scope, and you can replicate it then at different places in the United Kingdom, but also in Europe as well. And we want to create this consortium when I spoke to him recently, this consortium of projects from around the world of blue shark experts, because the blue shark is the most fin shark in the world, and populations are stable in some areas, but also plummeting in other areas as well. So this consortium will bring together these global experts, which we can work towards a common goal, which is to try and get better protection status for the blue shark and to try and help populations rebound, try and create more marine protected areas, and try as hard as we can to try and preserve this incredible species. So that's like the longevity of the project, and there's so many interesting things we can do. Andrea presents his research to universities across the country. We've done lots of group events, lots of talks, lots of educational outreach, and we're even starting to do some hackathons now to try and think of some other kind of technological solutions which can help with the research and help protect the sharks. So I hope we'll have to get you both down there so you can go see them.
Oh, absolutely, I'm there. I mean, pandemic allowing, yes. I am there.
I keep thinking that. Yeah, no, I have never ever swam with a shark of any sort, be it dogfish or otherwise, in the UK. So I was like, yes, that sounds amazing. And Cornwall is definitely, I have not been to Cornwall in years, and I just adore it there. It's so lovely. And what I think is super exciting is that you're talking about all of these different tools. I mean, eDNA, that's a real upcoming tool. It's quite kind of, there's so much work going into figuring out eDNA and eDNA samples at the moment. So taking the water samples and then looking for trace DNA to be able to track what different species are in the area. I know that it's being used to look at non-native species, and obviously now you're talking about how this tool set that you're developing can be used in replication in different locations. So that's really interesting, and also getting that standardized monitoring practice going. I'm a monitoring nerd, so I'm excited about all of these different things. But yeah, and also, so the students obviously help with the field work, and I think it's great that you're building those connections with the local people, because they are the stakeholders of the local environment, and that Andrea's project has done that. And obviously you guys are involved in supporting these kind of things as well. So do the students just do the field work, or is there the opportunity to do some lab work as well?
Yes, there is. Yeah. So I think so some of the students have actually done some of the lab work with Andrea as well at South Devon College. So yeah, there's some really great opportunities there as well. Definitely.
It's really nice to hear that it
Getting all the
seems
boxes ticked.
that the Conservation Project International and your work with it and behind it is so flexible, not only to the individuals that you onboard as projects, but also to the volunteers that you take on. So the fact if you've got somebody that is really, really into the monitoring and the data processing after a research trip, that you can be like, sure, if we've got capacity, we can take you on. Like, that sounds incredible. But how, as this is, your part-time passion project that is huge and has such a massive impact, how do you manage to keep your eye on the progress and the updates of all these projects that you're working on, but also think about what you've just mentioned, the longevity of these projects, and ensuring that you can adapt and overcome, and like make sure that you're still fundraising for these things and helping out. Like how do you balance that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, actually. I think the monitoring and evaluation part is super interesting, and something we're really looking, more into is how can you measure the impact of the project itself? How can you measure the impact you're having with the volunteers? So some of the ways we do that are how many volunteers come work with us, then go to work in full-time conservation, as a result of the experience we've given them. They then go off to get a job, so you can mark your impact quite well there. You can mark using like different things such as doing questionnaires, for example. Do a questionnaire pre someone coming on board with us and post, and then you've got like a data set there you can sort of measure against just to show the impact of what you're doing. We measure how many students come in and work with us, or how many partnerships we have, and what the outcomes of each of the projects are. So it's a really good question, and I think this is something which charities do struggle with. I think because if you're an NGO, you rely on grant funding, for example, to run a project, which might only be for 1 year or 2 years. After you've sort of done 2 years on the project and the funding's no longer there, you then have to look elsewhere for funding. So this is one of the drawbacks, I think, of the traditional conservation model, is that you are very donor heavy and don't reliant on programmatic work which is funded. So to overcome that barrier, from a conservation point of view, but also from a young conservationist point of view as well, we're starting to push more and more into running more unique ways of tackling conservation issues. So this is where like the hackathon comes into play, because you can create a prototype or something, a new sort of innovative solution over 2 days, and you can then develop that solution not as an NGO but as a startup, as a social enterprise. And not only then does that open you up to trading income, so you can actually have a scalable project which you can build and bring income in, so then you can pay for your team, and then scale up as any other business would. But you can also, as a social enterprise, also apply for certain grant funds and community funds and impact investment and things like that. So that's the model, which is this social entrepreneurship kind of thinking in conservation, where I really think a lot of the focus is going to be focused on in time to come.
I now see how your recent move in job makes a lot of sense for
Yes.
your personal development, but also the development of your charity.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. Just on those notes, we've mentioned the hackathon quite a few times, and that's obviously
Yes.
to do with the vaquita. But before we get on to diving deep into the vaquita, we've spoken about the illegal marine wildlife trade and a few other things. Is there any other projects you want to add before we deep dive into the hackathon and the vaquita?
Yeah, there is. There's one really cool one which we started working on, and then COVID sort of messed it up. This was working with a research project in British Columbia, which has this like a fjord, an amazing place where orcas, sperm whales, and fin whales all sort of live together. Again, loads of like the indigenous First Nations people has a massive cultural importance to them. So they have again, a bit like Ischia, they have a treasure trove of acoustic data. And one of the projects we were working on, which we got quite far into, was thinking, how can we think of a really cool way of illustrating this acoustic data, so the sounds of these amazing whales and dolphins. And so what we did is that we partnered with a British orchestra, and we created a synergy between classical music and the sounds of whale song
Oh wow.
into a classical musical performance. So that was the end goal, which we would then have we were hoping to have it at the Natural History Museum, have an actual orchestra concert. People can come, they can, we'd have some talks from the researchers, and then they'd obviously listen to this beautiful music. So that was one project which I love, and I really want to, get back on that when we can.
That is so innovative.
I'm
Yeah.
like, sign me up. Sign me up now. I am obsessed. There's one that's to do with stars where they've done like each star is allocated a certain pitch and a certain note and a certain like loudness. So listening to this, I'm like, I've literally just in my notes in capitals, sign me up, Harry.
Yeah, it's amazing. We got a sample from the composer, and it sounded so cool. So yeah, no, we're really very keen to do this, and we want to create a page on the website for acoustic specialisms and young conservationists in acoustic data, and to share. I think one of the things about conservation as well, it's very competitive. So we want to share all this research and data so people can listen to it and think, wow, these creatures are amazing, and maybe they're worth saving.
Yeah, and that's the point in this podcast a little bit. I think Hannah and I have that hope that by talking to young conservationists, PhD students, and people like yourself, we can ignite that passion and fuel that confidence for people. Just to say, try it, do it, find your experiences, give things a go. Like, conservation feels big and scary, but you can forge your own path with small but achievable steps.
Yeah.
And I think you're a very good example of that, Harry.
Oh well, thanks, Lexi. No, I totally agree. I think, and this is one of the great things, isn't it? Is that everyone has a certain skill set, and everyone can contribute to. And the problem is that sometimes when you think of a conservation, if you were like to take one of the big NGOs, for example, there's not many opportunities for you really to get involved unless you donate or you get a cuddly toy. So what we're trying to do is to say, brilliant, you have a skill set in accountancy. Well, here's an NGO who needs an accountant. Brilliant, get involved. There you go. You can use your skills for a greater purpose. And yeah, like breaking down those barriers of entry to conservation from people who have certain skill sets, young people who care about the issues, and giving them an avenue to actually get involved and have some impact.
I want to listen to. Oh, yeah. The first time I listened to that Starry Night thing, it like literally nearly made me cry because it's just like, wow. So,
No, that's great. I mean, that's the whole aim of the project, is to create that emotional connection with the audience and to have this like blue planet ripple effect that David Attenborough has, and yeah, to try and get more people, engaged in the issue.
Yeah, I just want COVID to be over so you can continue doing all this amazing work and picking up these new projects now. Like, not even for a personal reason anymore. Right. So, as Hannah said, we've mentioned a hackathon loads and loads of
Yeah.
times. So, I want to use this as kind of like one of the last big things we talk about. First and foremost, what's a hackathon?
Yeah, good question. I get this a lot. And so a hackathon is a collaborative event where people come together to solve problems. Probably the most simple way I can describe it.
But your one was it a month, 2 months ago? So it wasn't, not everybody came together physically. It was a
That's
virtual
right. Yeah, we did it
hackathon.
virtually. Yeah, you can. I do them in person, or you can run them virtually.
So, what was the aim of this hackathon? You've mentioned the Vaquita. What is a Vaquita? And then, yeah, just you go for it. You've done such an amazing job of explaining everything so well.
Okay.
Like, just
So Vaquita is the smallest porpoise and the most critically endangered marine mammal on Earth, and they live in the Sea of Cortez, which is in Baja California, in Mexico, not far from the border of the US. It is a evolutionary unique species by the ZSL, and there's only less than 10 remaining, probably less than 8. So they're found nowhere else on Earth. There's none in captivity. So this is really the last stand of the vaquita. They're really very beautiful. So they have these black distinct colorings around their eyes. They're very small, around 1.5 to 2 meters, but just a really enchanting species. So I always heard about the vaquita, and I always knew that it was a species of concern. But it wasn't until really I looked more into the issue back in August last year, and I came across the work of a guy called Andrea Costa, who works for an organisation called Earth League International, and a documentary called The Sea of Shadows, which I would thoroughly recommend watching. So this is a Nat Geo film, and this takes a deep dive into the issue of the vaquita and really explains the reasons for its sharp decline. So the vaquita's declined from, I think, around 550 in 1990 to now less than 10. So in less than 30 years, we've lost a huge amount of them. And Andrea's work is not so much conservation focus, but is focused more on criminality. So he is the first conservation intelligence organization where he works undercover with agents to infiltrate wildlife trafficking gangs and to gather intelligence and work with law enforcement agencies to arrest and prosecute them. So as you know, wildlife trafficking is the fourth most wealthiest illicit crime on earth, behind sex trafficking, weapons trafficking, and the drugs trafficking trade. It is an enormous problem. And in the vaquita's instance, it is a victim of the wildlife trafficking trade. So the vaquita is not targeted for itself, but is a product of bycatch, because illegal fishermen and poachers are targeting what's known as a fish called the totuaba fish. So the totuaba fish is a bit like a big sea bass. It's this huge fish, and its bladder is worth a lot of money on the black market in China and Southeast Asia. So it's actually used as an investment. So basically, the fishermen will catch these big totuaba fish, will dry the bladders, and the bladders will then be transported illegally back into Hong Kong, back then onto China. And the bladders are eaten as a delicacy, but are also bought by investors because they know the totuaba itself is a critically endangered species. So the value of that investment goes up.
Right.
And this, yeah, so it's pretty. The situation in some of with the vaquita is exceptionally dangerous, and the criminal syndicates behind this totuaba trade are linked to cartel mafia gangs, where they are armed to the teeth, with AK-47s and rocket launchers and things like that, and Chinese nationals in Mexico, which are part of the Chinese mafia gang. So they work together to with this illegal trade and supply the demand which is coming from China and the Far East. So this is not a conservation. Well, basically, this is a failure of conservation, the vaquita, as far as I see it, because conservationists have been working since 1990 on this issue. The Mexican government have spent $110 million in trying to save, into pouring this into conservation methods to try and save the vaquita, and it just subsequently hasn't worked. And the reason is behind that is of this criminal issue. So it's a criminality issue. So Andrea's work is very much focused on, taking down these criminal syndicates and hoping to prosecute them and disrupt this illegal supply chain. Because if you cut off the demand for the totuaba, then these fishing nets called gill nets, which have been launched everywhere in the Sea of Cortez, will hopefully disappear. And that's really the only hope we have for the vaquita.
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, I think you've touched on a really important thing there within conservation, when not only, working with local people and ensuring that we're providing livelihoods and making sure that people have a say in what's happening to their environment, but I think it's that, are you treating the symptom or are you treating the cause? And if you
Mm.
sink all of this money, wherever you get it from, but say, for example, funded by the government to save a species, and it's being put in the wrong part of conservation because you're looking at a symptom, then you're not going to solve the issue that you're looking at. So I think this is a really important, like, message, that you do have to take a step back and be like, right, okay, yes, of course, the vaquita being on the knife edge of extinction is horrifying and upsetting, and it shouldn't happen. And sure, we can, like, maybe take the gill nets out the water, but if we just take one out, who's going to put another one back in? So it is taking that step further and that step back and having that wider angle view that I think is really, really important just to highlight again.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more with you. You're 100% right. This is an instance where conservationists maybe need to take a bit of a back seat on this issue, and other experts like law enforcement agencies and prosecution lawyers and intelligence agencies like Andrea's work. This is where the resources and the funding should be focused on, because we've figured out the real reason really of why the vaquita, and it's not just about the vaquita. It's also about all of the all of the marine species that live in the Sea of Cortez. Um, so yeah, you're right. This is a criminality issue and not a conservation one. And many different case studies like this all around the world. And it's the wildlife trafficking side is I have a high interest in this area, not only from a legal point of view, but from trying to understand the economics behind the supply chain. It's really quite fascinating but tragic, and a lot of the work we're looking at in the future is also going to be this link between the illegal wildlife trade and zoonotic diseases. So, COVID-19, you could have a COVID-20, which could come from an illegal species, and just look at the impact that that's had on the global economy, on the world. And again, it's like, come on, we know where COVID, well, we have assumptions where we have an understanding that a lot of the pandemics, global health pandemics that we're faced with, whether it's Ebola um, and many others, are coming from wildlife. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
So if we want to prevent the next global health pandemic, then surely we should be doing, as an international force, everything we can to stop the illegal wildlife trade before we get hit by something which is much worse than COVID-19 and can devastate again the global economy and the world as we know it. And this is why these issues around illegal wildlife trade should be treated as national security issues, because not only are the criminals involved in this trade also using illegal wildlife trade to finance illicit sex trafficking, drugs trafficking, or weapons trafficking, but the implications of allowing another health pandemic has massive implications on member states around the world. So it's this convergence of threats that we need to start taking the illegal wildlife trade as seriously as we tackle terrorism, as we tackle the drugs trafficking trade, because the implications are just as serious. And that is kind of like the message we need to be hitting home, not only with the Vaquita, but on many different case studies around the world.
I think that's so interesting to highlight as well, because it's such this underground operation that a lot of what goes on potentially people don't realize. And as you've said, these detrimental effects from health, from a human population point of view, but also from an
Mm.
animal population point of view, if you're introducing things that aren't supposed to be there, it can have really negative effects for an animal population, be it spread of disease that then makes the native population ill and outcompetes the native population. And these are all things that, again, that kind of multidisciplinary approach is the way you need to go to be able to identify this. And one of the ones that comes to my mind, I worked a fair amount on sea turtles before I started getting obsessed with my now muddy PhD, was actually how you find the trade routes, because I didn't even realize that these bladders, for example, and it makes sense that they become this investment, but how they get from Baja to then get to China and these kind of things. And sea turtle eggs, they've used 3D printed sea turtle eggs with little chips inside them to track that kind of movement, because it happens so quickly. And I think unless you start to educate and people start to educate themselves on what's happening, it is something that, because it's out of maybe people's focus, that I don't want to say turn a blind eye, but unless you really start thinking about it, people maybe don't realize how big a problem it is that you've just highlighted.
But I think you're right, Hannah. There is an ignorance is bliss situation here. There's
Mm.
so many conservation stories that are so big and so sad, and you can learn so much just by watching documentaries, but it's not going to teach you everything. But you can feel like you've got enough just by watching, the suite of David Attenborough documentaries that we've all been obsessed with for years. So I think it is easy to say there is a limit on what people will take in, because I think there is enough sadness in the world when it comes to our conservation issues. But I think it is very important to be highlighting exactly what Harry's been saying, of like, even if you can't unlearn this, you're not going to be able to unhear this episode. You're going to now have an awareness of it. Like, I know I'm probably going to do a bit more research into it. I say probably, absolutely. So I don't know what I can physically do other than support the Conservation Project International and watch what they carry on doing as a organization. But I will become more educated, because I feel it is important now that I know about it. And I think it's having the ability to say, I didn't know about this before, but I'm going to improve from this point. I imagine you see that quite frequently, Harry.
Yeah, absolutely. You both touched on some really, really good points there. And I wonder if a documentary series like Blue Planet, but maybe if it was focused on the illegal wildlife trade, which would be on BBC, for example, would have a really strong impact.
Mm-hmm.
If you think about the pangolin, for example, the most trafficked mammal in the world, if I was to speak to maybe even some of my own family, if I asked them what a pangolin is, they probably would not know what it is. But look what's happening to that species. It's been obliterated, literally boiled alive for its scales. So it is really, it's a very difficult one. But I think the first stage of, I think raising awareness and making people aware of it, and linking those links back to the global health, and thinking, so it's always, I think, to get people to care, you have to have, it's this kind of thing with climate change, isn't it? We all know about this, is that we've been talking about climate change for God knows how long now. 10 years at least I've been talking about it. People have been talking about it since 1970, 1950, but many people still think it's not really an issue or doesn't impact their lives. Well, I think COVID has demonstrated that all changes, because COVID did impact your life in the most strongest way. You basically had to stay in your house. Some people haven't seen their family for a year. You can't go out and see your friends. And unless we tackle these issues now, what comes next will make COVID look very insignificant. Whether that's
Absolutely.
so that is, I think, trying to drive home that message as well, to say, look, we really need to start tackling these issues, because if we don't, then I don't even know what life is going to be like for my grandchildren. If we
Yeah.
continue going down this, and it's really depressing talking about this, but if we do continue down this business as usual approach, it's going to be very bleak. Unfortunately, I don't want to lower the tone, but it's not looking too positive at the moment. So that's why we need to really start thinking more collaboratively, and trying new ways of tackling these issues.
But that's exactly it, yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, you're talking to two conservationists on a conservation podcast, where we've obviously expecting to have a certain type of audience that hopefully share with their friends and family. But I think you're right, a multidisciplinary approach, thinking with these new innovative ideas and trying to change the course that we're currently on, is really, really important. But the first stage of that is raising awareness. And whenever I make anything that's to try and get any sort of public engagement or public change, any sort of like informative educational activity, it's giving people the wider view of what the issue is, but then really narrowing it down to, and this is how it impacts you individually, but it's not all bad. This is how you can make one small tiny change that will barely impact your life to make it better on this massive scale. And I think we can all relate to that in the sense of recycling. When I was growing up, we didn't have recycling boxes in the house. Every single house in the United Kingdom has the ability and the knowledge and the access to be able to know how to recycle properly. And yes, of course, it is the third step in reuse, recycle, but it is something that actually makes a difference. So I think if we can do that with some of these different conservation issues, then we can incite change. I mean, just look at, like you said, what Blue Planet did with plastic straws.
Mm.
It's possible. I think as conservationists, we just need more BBC time.
Absolutely, Lexi. And also the good thing is that we have movements now. This wasn't about 10 years ago when I was starting to get involved in this thing. We have Extinction Rebellion, we've got
Mm-hmm.
Greta, we've got so many young people, which, for them, climate change and the environment are probably the most important issues out of any of the political issues now. We have things are changing. Black Lives Matter. We've got diversity and inclusion. These are all really positive and progressive steps, which our generation, I'm a little bit older than you both now, 31, but the new generations which are coming through can see the urgency of these things, can see the unfairness in everything, and that gives me a huge amount of hope. Is that the future change makers, will be the leaders, the future leaders, in changing the course on climate change and environmental destruction. So that is the hope that we have, is that there are so many young people that truly, really passionately care about these issues. We have to equip them, we have to give them platforms, and we have to empower them. And that is a really important message. And like you said, Lexi, with plastics, so many people can make just small changes, can't they, to their their daily lifestyle, which can have maximum impact. Imagine if millions and millions of people started making small changes, whether it's through transitioning to renewable energy, changing things, becoming vegetarian. All of these small changes have a ripple effect and can really lead to greater change.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're segueing really, really nicely into my next question. So you've mentioned obviously just everything that the Conservation Project International aims to do for young conservationists, but how can our listeners get involved with your charity if they would like to? Or myself or Hannah.
I'm there for the sharks.
Absolutely. Well, there you go. So there's opportunities to get involved with the conservation work we do. So first thing to do is to follow us on Instagram, and that's like the platform we use mostly. I think there's at TC Project INT. And one interesting project actually, which we would love for your listeners to get involved in, is that I'm really also interested in how we can make conservation more inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So we've just done a recent podcast series, or an Instagram series, as I would say, on women leadership and conservation. So we interviewed many young women who are working, both like yourselves. Would be really great to have you guys on to talk about, the work that you're both doing. And we interviewed, I think, around 7 or 8 young females that are doing some extraordinary work. And now we want to open that up to more, diverse and more inclusive from, different communities, to also highlight some of the work they're doing. Because I do think there is also an issue around people from different backgrounds and different communities being able to get involved in conservation as well. So I do think there is a diversity issue, especially for young people coming into these areas as well. So we would love to hear from anyone who might be interested in that. We'll be doing lots of future. We're hoping to launch a mentorship program, so linking young people to professional conservation professionals and providing one-to-one and group mentoring. So that's something we're hoping to look at pretty soon. And then we'll do more of these. The hackathons are so great because people can just apply and can work on different solutions, and it's all free. So there's no cost to getting involved in those kind of things. And more people who are interested. I mean, if any of your listeners are interested in this orchestra project, for example, and would like to help us try and fundraise or do some really fun crowdfunding events or anything around that, that would be amazing, because then if we get the funding in, we can really bring that project to life.
I think me
So
and
I think
Hannah
there
are
are
already here to give you any support that you need. So I
excellent.
can't imagine any of our listeners will be like, nah, no, thank you. I think you'll have an influx, at least of our friends and the people that we've already interviewed.
Well, perfect. That would be amazing. And then we're gonna build a community space as well, so we can onboard members in a much more easier way, and have like a channel where we can share like updates, what kind of jobs there are in the conservation sector, and build this community out and have regular catch ups. We do this anyway with like regular Zoom catch ups where we see how everyone is. So yeah, building that community element in is something we're focusing on as well. We've just got to find the tech and do all that stuff.
Awesome. No, that makes sense. Yeah, we'll make sure all the links and everything are in the show notes and on the website as well, so that people can access everything and hopefully easily navigate through all of your social medias and things.
And yeah, if you're listening and getting
Amazing.
super, even I think your message throughout has been any idea, any thought, any want or need for networking. If you're sat there thinking, I have an idea for this project, is just to get in contact and reach out, make connections through LinkedIn, Instagram, and all of the other links that we will definitely be providing.
Definitely be bold. You got to be bold. It's a competitive world out there. So
I close my eyes and click yes on something. So that's been my new thing, is to stop thinking about it and to just go for it. And yeah, it's a good way to make sure you're grabbing some opportunities while also thinking about your time management
And
as well.
never forget, you need those friends to be like, yep, you clicked yes, you're going to do it, and giving you the pep talk before you do whatever it is you signed up for. because that's been my recent
Yeah,
role.
pretty much.
Yeah, I think we can all get a bit carried away when it comes to the conservation stuff, doesn't it? We'll just try and do as much as you can.
Yeah, but no, I really wanted to thank you, Harry. This episode has had me absolutely cheesing. I've had goose pimples. I've obviously hit despair with you whilst we've been talking about the wildlife crime issues. I don't think I've been on such a roller coaster for a while on this podcast, but thank you for being such an engaging guest. And we're kind of hitting towards the end of the podcast now, so Hannah's going to ask you a couple of questions, but I just wanted to thank you.
Oh, it's a pleasure. No, thank you for having me on. Much appreciated.
Yeah, like she said that so well. And Harry, like, just your detail and the way you answer questions has been amazing. One of the last questions I'm wanting to ask is, if people are listening thinking, I've got these ideas of an NGO I want to set up, are you able to give, I don't know, I'm going to say 5-step process right now, and it isn't a 5-step process at all. If there were 5 tick boxes that people had to kind of start off with of setting up their own NGO, what would they do?
Really good question. We did an NGO challenge last year with Plymouth University, so I can kind of bring up some, and I was also, well, I still do some charity law as well. I think the first thing is to think about what is the purpose of what you're trying to do. Is there anyone else who's already doing that? If there are there ways you can partner with them? And what is unique about your approach? So when you set up a charity, you have to think of what's charity objectives. So you have a certain goals or objectives about what your charitable purpose is going to be, and they kind of form the activities of your organisation when you move forward. I think that's really important, is to have a look at what's out there. Can I bring a unique angle to this? And what would be the purpose of doing that? Secondly, if you're looking to set up a charity, is you have to think about charity trustees, and these are trustees have a fiduciary duty under law to basically, they'll be the owners of the charity, so they will be the people who will be making the most important decisions, and you have to have a minimum of 3 before you incorporate it as a charity. So having to think about who would you like on your board. Is it going to be a scientist? Would you like someone who has other skills, like maybe from a legal background or an accountant background? So having a real think about who the main people are you're going to onboard your organisation. I think funding. So funding is a really critical thing to think about, and I would also encourage people not only think about setting up a charity, but as I mentioned at the start, is there a business angle to what you want to do? Can you set up a kelp farm or a seaweed farm? Can you come up with a carbon offsetting scheme? Can you plant trees and then get corporates to sponsor you by planting trees? Look at the corporate sector, because a lot of big private institutions are now looking to transition into more environmental social governance kind of work. So how can you think of a new innovation which is scalable, which you can charge the corporate sector for? So think about your fee structure, and think about the impact. And I think impact is again, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, is super important. How can you measure the impact of what you're doing? Is it tangible? What are your objectives? What are your overall outcomes? That's really important as well. Have a think about jurisdictions. So where is the focus of your charity going to be? Is it going to be based in the UK, or is it going to be more international? If it's more international, do I have to think about partnering with international organizations? Is there a community element to what I'm doing? If I'm looking at the Sumatran rhino, is there indigenous communities which we can partner with on the ground? I think local people and indigenous groups have such great knowledge and customs to solving conservation issues, and when you think about other jurisdictions, sometimes it's really difficult. You might need people who can speak a local language. You might need translators. Thinking about local laws and customs and how that applies to the work you might be doing. So there are just some other things, and then also think about business development, marketing, and social media. So creating a brand of what you're doing, Like think about the logo, think about your social media presence, the name. The name is really important, and that takes ages. Thinking about a really cool name, and we're thinking about setting up a new entity at the moment to do some stuff. And the name, oh, we've come up with some absolute shockers. Um, yeah, thinking about a really cool name. And what I love at the moment is like disruptors. So let's disrupt conservation, right? Let's come up with a totally unique and wild name, which doesn't have the word earth in, which doesn't have the word nature in, doesn't have the word conservation in. And let's do something which has maximum impact, but is a completely different, crazy angle that can be scalable. So like wild ideas, love those. Um, Innovation as well, I'd say, like can you use technology to further your purpose of what you're doing? Um, I think I've babbled on there for quite a long time, but hopefully there's some things in there which might be helpful. I think it comes down to really, having a really great idea and making it scalable and selling that idea. I think they're really three really important things about how you do it. And then lastly, last thing I'll say is that operationally as well, really really thinking about your support network around you, because when you set up an organization, it's bloody tough. You have to become, as an entrepreneur, you have to become not only a conservationist, you have to have your legal hat on, your finance hat, you've got to do business plans, pitch decks, you've got to be social media. Some of the stuff, when I was doing all this, I did all this myself for a long time. Now I'm lucky to have a support network around me. So having as friends or family or people you really like and trust, having a support network around you is so important for not only your mental health, your well-being, and also to help you with your mission. Someone there just to remind you that what you're doing is really cool. Keep at it. Don't give in, and keep up the great work. So that's also a really important part of setting up an organisation.
Thank you for that amazing overview. I think it was such a well-rounded answer to that question. So I can tell that you've done similar work, like you said, with Plymouth University.
That was just fantastic. And I think that applies actually when you're saying about it. The names thing, yes, World About Conservation has had probably about 25 different names and involved afternoons of sitting there and just saying words and deciding what we like. And same with our logo. It's had several different logos, but that was then decided on, and colours. But it is what you've just said. Also, it doesn't just apply to setting up your own NGO or setting up your own conservation project or any project. That it applies to any project in any way, shape, or form. I think of some of the stuff you said. Obviously, some things to a lesser extent, but support networks especially. And obviously, you've spoken about building them and building different types of network. But yeah, your friends, your family, the people you work with, and just getting those little bits of experience that you've just spoken about that can help you with all these different parts of this process. But that was an amazing, amazing answer, Harry. So thank you so much.
Oh no, it's a pleasure.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would add to it is just once you've got all this knowledge and once you've decided that you've gathered all the things that you need and done all the internet searches, just try it. Like, if you fail because you've tried, you will have learned something. And I think Hannah and I had to give ourselves these kind of pep talks before we started the podcast. But we're so happy we've done it. And I think you only regret what you didn't do. So if you've got an idea and you really, really want to go for it, just go for it. Like Harry said, be bold.
Don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah, I mean, you two have done an amazing thing. This podcast series is fantastic, and you've done this off your own initiative. And like you said, Lexi, you'd never thought about it, you never would have done it.
Yeah. Right, we are very close to the end of the podcast. Harry, have you got anything else that we haven't mentioned or we haven't asked, or anything that you haven't covered that you'd like to chat about?
No, I don't think so. I think I've covered, most things that we're doing, and yeah, no, it's been great, and it's really when I speak about all the stuff we've done, it's quite nice because we've done so much, and sometimes you have to take a bit of a step back to sort of go across all the stuff you've done before. So it's been really nice from that aspect, and it's been lovely speaking with you both.
Oh, good. I'm happy you've enjoyed it. Hannah, is there anything else you'd like to ask?
I think we've pretty much covered everything. And I think that's also another great point of just Taking a step back and looking at everything that you've achieved or all the skills you've developed is such a good practice to do, regardless of what stage of your career or life you're at. But no, I think that's pretty much it. So I would just say thanks for chatting to us today, Harry, and thank you to everyone that's listening to us. And we hope everyone has an absolutely wild day. And bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening today. As always, we have been Wild About Conservation and you have been awesome. Please do leave us a review. We would really appreciate it and we do read them all.
To keep exploring with us, drop us an email or find us on our socials. All the links are in our description and the show notes. If you enjoy our show and want to support us, we are also on Patreon. Just £1 a month, 25p an episode, will cover our creation costs, and anything above that we donate to charity. Thank you to those of you that are already helping us to keep creating.
Our chosen charity for this season are the British Divers Marine Life Rescue, who are an organisation dedicated to the rescue and well-being of all marine animals in distress around the UK. Donations will go to training teams of volunteers and maintaining specialised equipment that is vital for their work.
Don't forget to look out for our next episode next Wednesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If we aren't there, do let us know.
And remember, step outside and get wild about conservation. Bye!
How do you get wild?
Watching wildlife documentaries.
Wildflower painting.
Diving.
Wild swimming.
Ocean watching.
Rock climbing.
Bird watching.
Listening to podcasts.
Hill walks.
Visiting a wildlife charity.